All right, so Demarcus Cousins had lots to say about the Kings. By the way, quick note, Alex Cobb was injured in the game today. Gabe Kapler says he's going to head to the IL. Looks like a groin situation. So we'll keep an eye on that. But Demarcus Cousins, he spoke with Mark Spears, and it's tough to keep track of where Mark Spears is. I know he's at ESPN.
Anscape.
It's now called Anscape. So Anscape is where Spears is. He's written for like 3 or 4 different places, but it's the same place with.
Yes.
It's ESPN. So Spears, who I appreciate, respect, I think he's great at what he does. He caught up with Cousins, and I know a lot of people were looking at these quotes yesterday and talking about them. I saw Dave this morning, Carmichael Dave, do one of the Just a Minutes that we have on our social channels. His Just a Minute was about Cousins and what he had to say. So let me first give you Cousins' quotes to Spears about the Kings. Let's first start with the decision by the Kings to fire Mike Malone during the 2014-2015 season. Cousins said, quote, "I thought they were insane, and it shows. You don't even really have to speak on it because what I knew then about Mike, I knew he would soar. He went to the next place and has been nothing but successful. When he was with us in Sacramento, he was successful. Still doesn't make sense, and it never will. Everything else that happened to Sac should have never happened. That guy should have never been fired. The rest of what happened in Sac would never happened if they let him go. On the Kings, what did Sac do for me? Besides say my name on draft day. I did more for them than they did for me. That's just being honest. Just being 100% honest. I had 2 owners, 3 GMs, 7 coaches in 7 years. I was there 7 years. I had 3 GMs, 2 owners, and 7 coaches. Not much more needs to be said." Cousins was then asked if he would do anything different. He said he would have skipped the workout with the Kings organization, the draft workout. Obviously saying, if I skipped the workout, I would have been telling them that I did not want to play for them. I would not have been drafted by them, etc., etc., etc. All right, so first of all, I know people want to make this out to be either or, right? It's either Cousins' fault or it's the Kings' fault. How about both?
Yes.
How about equal opportunity? Here's one thing, Vlad, that I can't stand when we have these sports conversations, because I think it's disingenuous and I think it's just ridiculous and not realistic. People always want to choose. They always want to make this black or white. I've said for my entire life, everybody wants to treat this world as black or white. And the fact is, if you look around and you have conversations with people, there's a lot of gray within our life.
It's very rarely black and white.
Very true. And so when you look at these quotes from DeMarcus, people want to inevitably pick a side. And so I had somebody tweet at me last night at Nick C Radio, the history of the draft picks while DeMarcus was in Sacramento. I don't think anybody on God's green earth would make the argument that the Kings supported Cousins with talent on the floor at a high enough level where they could consistently compete in the postseason and try to make a run. Nobody is arguing that. I am not arguing it. Chris will not argue it, because if you argue that, you're delusional. The Kings did an awful job when Cousins was here, giving him enough help on the floor. They didn't do it, okay? That can be true. But it also can be true that Cousins did not help the organization. Because when you are the face of the franchise, when you are supposed to be the guy that does the right things and works the right way and handles himself maturely on the floor, helps lead other guys, when you are in that position, you have a lot of responsibility. And when you fall short of that responsibility, that doesn't have to always be on you, all on you, but at least some of it is. And so before we even get to what he said, I just want to make this clear. Do I blame Cousins or do I blame the Kings? I blame both. The Kings did not do a good enough job supporting him, and Cousins did not do nearly a good enough job of trying to be an adult in the room and try to lead people and try to figure things out. And he shot himself in the foot a lot, and he shot the team in the foot a lot by what he did on the floor. And I think he made it tougher for the Kings to sell this as a place that you wanted to be when you saw all of this other nonsense. So I think there's a lot of blame to go around, Chris.
And to go back on to Cousins, when he said that when he needs to be the face of the franchise or the leader, you need to act a certain way. I don't think that's the right role for him. I think he's is best as a supporting role. And you've seen it. He won an Olympic gold, and he was great for the team, but it wasn't because he was the guy. He was the face. He was the guy who's getting everybody there. He was the guy that followed, that took orders and did what his job that he was supposed to do. And I don't think that I don't think he would ever be, his best spot would ever be the guy.
I agree with that.
But the problem is, though, he's got more than enough talent to be the guy.
Right. He's got the talent to be the guy. And look, the Kings could have helped the maturation process. They could have brought guys in who could help him. They could have had consistent coaching, and I agree with all of that. But inevitably, Cousins is a different cat, right? Like, you look at how many other people reacted and did certain things like Cousins did when he was here in Sacramento. How many other guys do you see that happen around the NBA? Even in difficult situations, like even as bad as it gets in some cities, dudes don't react like that, right? Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander could be losing his mind right now in Oklahoma City. He's improving. He's playing better. He's being the ultimate teammate. He's not losing himself. So my point is, you can't excuse everything about Cousins' immaturity on the franchise, because Cousins could have gone somewhere else and been as immature as he was in Sacramento and that other place, and they could have had the same coach. He is who he is. And I think, when I read the comments, the first thing that really jumped out at me, aside from the blame pie needs to be split up among a lot of people, is that Cousins took zero accountability.
Yeah.
Zero. And it goes into the idea, again, it goes into this idea of who's to blame, how much are they to blame. Cousins takes zero accountability with any of these comments. Everything is directed at other people and other things that happened. It was the Kings' fault. They messed that up. He does not look inward. He's not looking at himself in the mirror. He's not saying, you know what, I could have been more mature back then. I could have handled things differently. I regret. I'm sorry that sometimes I flew off the handle. I certainly did not help the situation. It was a difficult situation. I did nothing to help that situation. Cousins looks at this, again, he's looking at this as black or white. He looks at this and says, I'm a very talented guy, and I put up the numbers. He's asked about Vlade Divac later in the interview, and or he's asked about, Hall of Fame and all that stuff. He says, well, Vlade's in there. And Spears is like, well, do you think he doesn't belong in there? And he says, Vlade's in there. Which, of course, is, his own personal jab at Vlade, and he's not happy with Vlade, whatever the case may be. But Cousins is looking at this like a lot of pro athletes look at this. He's looking at the numbers, and he says, I was an all-star. I went there, I put up numbers. Not my fault we didn't win. Not my fault we couldn't be consistent. He's erasing everything else, all the intangibles and all the other things that he could have helped. He's erasing all of that because he's just going to make it easier on himself to say, yeah, but I put up numbers and I produced. So his inability to take accountability is something that is not a surprise to people, because he did not take a lot of accountability back in the day when he was doing all this other stuff. It's a lot of woe is me. And I think that says a lot about Cousins. Secondly, again, there's no excusing how the Kings organization fell short while Cousins was here. Nobody's going to deny that. It was equal opportunity messy, and they wasted some good quality basketball talent by the way they failed to support Cousins. Now, the Cousins trade, and this kind of goes to the heart of the problem with, DeMarcus and how this team was handled and run and all of that. I don't think anybody would disagree that it was time for Cousins to go. It's not that they handled the Cousins thing so badly and it led to him getting traded, and that was, that was the downfall. That was part of the downfall of the last 5, 6, 7 years. It's how they reacted from that point. It's what the Kings did after they dealt Cousins, because they were set up, man. I mean, when you look at this, you look at that draft, you look at, 2017, you're in prime position. You get Fox at 5, and you end up trading that 10th pick, which ended up being Zach Collins, and you get Justin Jackson back, which was obviously a swing and a miss. And so, you start to look and you get Harry Giles, who was a swing and a miss. So that you could have recovered from Cousins being shipped off if you evaluated talent and developed that talent the right way, right? You're fine with Fox at 5, obviously. But again, guys that went after 10, Donovan Mitchell, Bam Adebayo, John Collins, Jared Allen, OG Anunoby. I mean, those are 5 dudes. Kyle Kuzma, Derek White. All of those guys ended up being better players than you took at 15 and 20. So, I mean, if you look back and you imagine, what if you drafted De'Aaron Fox and John Collins instead of drafting Zach Collins to trade him to Portland? If you ended up with Fox and John Collins out of that draft, you're on your way. So, it's what happened after that deal. Cousins led them to that deal. He was partially to blame. Once that deal was done, you could have done a much better job than you did. And that's where you can really get on the Kings. Not because post Cousins, it was just ruined. It was not handled the right way. You had several opportunities to make a difference, and you failed. So it's going to be a very interesting offseason, I think, this offseason, because this is a chance for this team with Monte McNair to find itself. You got Fox, you got Domas, you got the pick coming up, you've got Davion, you got some assets. This is a big offseason, and you can't squander another offseason if you're this organization.
One of the major problems I had with what he said was he wouldn't work out for Sacramento as if it was a choice, because, if you remember back to that draft, people were saying, Cousins has all the ability, but there was questions about his mentality. There was questions, and even when the Kings, because they said that he could have been 1, 2, or 3 if there wasn't questions about that. And there was a little bit of a talk of, is this sort of a risk for the Kings for drafting Cousins? So I think that's just a little, it's going back and you're not remembering things how they were at the time.
It's revisionist history. It's also a way to make yourself feel better about things. And, again, zero accountability. And at the end of the day, you got to wonder, would Cousins have worked out if things were different here? I don't know. He's arguing with Will Barton last night on the bench during a playoff game. I mean, I don't think he proved to anybody that he is all of a sudden much more mature and responsible and could be one of the leaders on a team. I think his comments would lead you to the opposite direction, that this is somebody who is kind of, in his own circle and vacuum and not worrying about anything else outside of it and points fingers versus looking at himself. 916-339-1140 is the text line, at Nick C Radio on Twitter.